This is Flipping the Script podcast, the soon-to-be #1 leadership podcast for purpose-driven leaders and great guest experts who give us a unique insight into what leadership looks like behind the scenes. I'm Shalia Stafford, your host, and I'm committed to helping you lead your challenges using leadership strategies to gain new perspectives, fuel your growth, and transform the way you execute on your success. Welcome back, everyone. It's Shalia here. Today, we're going to flip the script on the game of hardball in business that many of us women and even men didn't even know existed when it comes to gender differences and how they can affect our winning strategy as more and more women step into leadership positions. But here's the kicker. If you don't know what the game is and you don't know the rules of hardball, you've already lost before you've begun. How can we understand the strategies that enable women to flourish in their workplace while remaining true to their inner selves as women and get off the bench so you can play with the big boys? I am so thrilled to welcome you to today's episode, as it is a very special episode for me on the day of my birthday. We'll all receive the gift to go behind the scenes of a transformational leader who is a living example of leadership in action and someone that I personally fangirl over all the time, Tammy Hughes. Tammy, who is a CEO of The Heim Group, one of the nation's premier consulting firms for gender differences and communications in the workplace. As a speaker, workshop facilitator, and experienced business leader, she helps companies learn how to value the unique styles of men and women and turn them into a competitive advantage. Tammy, it is my pleasure to welcome you as our guest expert. We're so grateful that you're here with us today.
Thank you. It's great to be with you as well, Shalia.
You know, in tradition of the show, we like to ask a few fire away questions to get to know you a little better. Should we fire away?
Yeah, fire.
Okay, so what is something that you're curious about right now?
Well, right now, what I'm spending a lot of my time diving into research-wise is really pulling apart the two words competence and confidence. And so I'm curious right now, especially about how those are defined, not just by men and women, but I'm really looking at how those are defined by organizational cultures. So that's where my curiosity is today.
Oh, wow, you piqued my curiosity. What is something that you understand today about your life that you didn't understand a year ago?
Oh, wow. It's probably going to be something that I've been learning every year of my life, the more I'm adulting, is that I don't need to take some things as seriously as my natural tendency is. And so I hope I'm not in the same place today as I was a year ago with that. I hope I can just sit back and relax and enjoy life and not worry so much about trying to control it or maneuver it all the time.
We'd love to hear what your magic formula is there, because I'm sure a lot of us are in a similar place.
There is no magic formula. It's just hard work to remind myself constantly.
It's a lot about noticing, huh? Just when we're in that moment.
Awareness. That's right. Being aware. And I have a husband and two young adult boys in my life, our kids, and they're fantastic at helping me be aware.
That is very true. What is something that you'll never do?
Never. Ooh, that's a great question. I will never bungee jump.
I'm with you. So given your expertise, what do you wish you would have known when you started out?
Oh my goodness. I wish I would have known so much when I started out. So part of what I know got me into this sort of work is I was born right outside of Washington, D.C. as the sixth most unexpected child. And when I came along, I had significantly older parents and significantly older siblings, the oldest of which was a boy who was 18 years older. Then there was a boy who was 16 years older. Then there was a boy who was 14 years older. And then there was a boy who was 11 years older. And I had one sister. She was 7 years older than me. And she was born with special needs. She had Down syndrome. So I know that a big part of my yearning to understand how gender works differently, not just good, bad, right, wrong, but differently, really came from my home as a child. And I'll tell you, when I got through school and started with my first organizational job with Xerox Corporation, I was with them for almost 8 years. I'll tell you, it was shocking to me shocking, and I didn't understand at all how to work with women. And that is because I grew up in a house that had well schooled me to function in the male culture. And man, I wish I would have known back then some of what I now know about the female culture. I could have been so much more effective. So that's something, if I could redo it again, I would go back with both sets of lenses so I could have been effective across both genders.
Well, that's a perfect segue. Without further ado, let's jump right in because this is going to be a very insightful episode that's going to help us. It's going to be one that we're going to really want to share with our organizations, our teams, and all women in business. I know for me, when I read the book that you co-authored, I was leading a high-performing sales team across multiple states, and I worked with an all-male executive team. And your book, Hardball for Women in Business, was a game changer. No pun intended.
That's great.
It really changed my perspective completely on how to read situations based on the data that's out there, not my own bias, and really even biases that I didn't even know I had. And it gave me new strategies to not just progress with my career, but to support my team adequately from both sides. And today, this is a book that I religiously recommend to every woman that I know in business, regardless of their industry. And I'm so excited to be able to have you on today to share these invaluable nuggets of wisdom, research, and strategy in the next 50 minutes or so. So here's a fair warning to our listeners. Be prepared to be on the edge of your seat. Let's start here. For those who are not familiar with the book and the women who are listening and are becoming aware that they didn't even know they were standing on a playing field while a game is being played around them, can you tell us more about Hardball and what it is and why it's so critical for women to understand the rules of the gamesmanship in business?
Sure, absolutely. I think the real basic answer to that is that most of us are born into life with one set of gender lenses. And certainly I recognize that that sounds like a pretty binary way to approach this topic. And the reason that it has to be a bit binary sounding at this point is because research speaks to the ends of the continuum. And so for those of you that are joining this podcast who say, that's really not me, I'm much more in the middle of the continuum along that line somewhere, that's a fantastic place to be, a healthy place to be. I just don't have any research yet to speak to that middle part. So I will be forced to speak to the ends of the continuum at this point, which means I'm simply making healthy generalizations. I certainly won't be stereotyping at all. But I really think what it comes down to is having both sets of lenses. And I think of that as being bilingual, the ability to understand my own culture, but also to understand another culture so that I can be more effective. You think about taking a 3-month short-term assignment to work in, I'll just pick a country, Japan. If you continue to do everything in your American kind of way when you get there, think about how effective you actually think you could be. I mean, make your own prediction. Probably not very, but once you get there, if you learn a little bit about their culture and you make some small adaptations, like you try to greet in Japanese in the morning and say goodbye on your way out, and you maybe have some of the food that's customary for them to have at lunch as well. Once in a while, don't change who you are, but just make some subtle adaptations, you stand a much better chance of being effective. And that's exactly what this is. By understanding the other gender culture, or perhaps your big learning today, your aha might be like mine, your own gender culture better. You stand the chance of being significantly more effective together.
Is that part of something that comes with our behavior and how we were socialized, or is it biology?
It's a great question. It's the leading question in every session I do. And here's how I answer it. It's just like epigenetics. So epigenetics tells us that we are handed a certain amount of DNA that we don't have any choice over. And we are also handed a certain amount of experience, much of which we also don't have any choice over. And we're a combination of both of those. And so, as I talk about differences today, think of the fact that, yes, it's a combination of nature and nurture. And some of these, when we look at PET scan research and we look at medical research, some of it sure does make us think that there's a lot of it that's pretty nature hardwired, but it's still epigenetics. It's a combination.
And I know in the book it was mentioned too that in order to understand why so many women are frustrated in their attempts to advance in their career today, we have to take a closer look at the lessons that we learned on how to be a girl. What were those lessons like for you growing up? And how has your research showed you about the critical point of our formative years and how they can both hinder or support our winning strategy in business?
Well, that's a great question. So most girls are taught when they're younger to get along and to play nice. And, to take that even further, young girls are some of the most phenomenal negotiators you're going to find out on a schoolyard. One girl will probably say to another girl, I want to play house. The other girl will say, well, I want to play nurse. Well, then how about if you bring your sick baby to me? So girls in youth are often looking for win-win games in ways that on playgrounds, boys are most often looking to play some win-lose games. I win, you lose. These aren't good or bad lessons, but they're different lessons. And then some of the research also shows us that as we age and get closer to the work lifetime, girls tend to play and have played all throughout life in dyads. In groups of twos. And boys oftentimes are playing in groups. And so you think even about how relationship, which is central in the female culture, it's easy to see that when you look all the way along formative years. And boys tend to really play in hierarchies, where there's somebody above them or below them, and they kind of know where they are in the pecking order. This can be very perplexing to young girls and to women. But the reality is it's very functional and it works well in the male culture. It's just a matter of being able to understand what's functional and works well in the other culture.
In your experience, how have you seen this play out in the business setting?
Well, where it becomes problematic in the workplace, and that's why the need for a book and why we call it Hardball, is women sometimes play by the rules of the female culture and men sometimes play by the rules of the male culture, kind of exclusive of each other without even knowing that there's other rules out there. So men tend to fit in that hierarchy well, fully aware of where they are in the pecking order of an organization and constantly looking to jockey to move up the order. Well, women live in what's called a flat structure. And that means that women are often looking at sharing power and promoting and collaborating, promoting other people, attributing success to other people. This works really well in the female culture. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to realize those are two different ways to approach work. And so that can play out oftentimes in some big ways, organizationally speaking. It is one of the pieces that creates some of that unconscious bias. Unconscious bias are blind spots that our brains have because we have too much data coming in at one time. So our brain has learned over time to take shortcuts. And some of those shortcuts are the things I just talked about.
I can see that. And, there was something that was an experience that I had. And after I had it, I thought I am so grateful that I had the book because I was able to point it out. But I remember being in a meeting with all male executives, and we were having a very challenging discussion that got heated very quickly. And I remember that I had the person that I reported to next to me, and it began to get heated to a level 10 to the point where I almost felt, and with another male executive, that I felt that I wanted to maybe help him out and say, hey, maybe you're getting to level 10. Let's bring it back down, in fear that he was going to jeopardize his standing or his relationship, as you say, with the others. And it was like watching a scene out of a movie. As soon as they were done, they high-fived, they talked about getting lunch. And I was like, what did I just experience?
Let's get a beer. That's right. Because it makes sense in the male culture to take a lesson, learn from it, drop it, and move on. And when you think about two women that have had a discussion of conflict in the workspace, I often ask groups that are with me, both men and women, do you think that they're going to drop that and move on? Well, no, they've just had a lifetime experience. And that is what is, it's probably one of the more dysfunctional parts of female culture. But hey, we've got to make sure we understand both and how they navigate.
And why do you tend to see that most times when women are in positions of power, it's typically other females who are the least supportive towards them?
Yeah. Oh boy, you are sure right about that. By the way, no matter where I speak around the planet, and I've gotten to speak in all sorts of countries everywhere, when I ask people about this, it's called the power didn't even rule. Basically, that expectation that women have of other women, that the power will be kept flat or dead even. And where that becomes problematic is when a woman is bumped up and promoted to a high level position. Sometimes I ask the audience usually, who is it in the organization that tries to bring her right back down to where she belongs? Is it men or is it women? And I always hear resounding, it's women. Well, why do women do this? Well, because she has violated the hierarchy by moving herself up in the hierarchy. Women often want to bring her right back down. So let me give you a story and see if this helps it make some sense. If a man goes up to a female assistant, slaps a file on her desk and says, hey, I need this project by 3, he'll probably get it. If a woman goes up to her female assistant and uses the same language that he just used with his female assistant, hey, I need this project by 3, she better start praying. Because what the woman expects of her is a little relationship work up front. Hey, how are you? How are you doing? How was that soccer tournament? Hey, is the sick baby feeling better? Hey, if you can fit this project in by 3, I really appreciate it. Now that she has to do a little relationship work up front isn't a problem. Let me tell you how that can become a problem. It's working for an organization. They brought me in to talk with their executive team. And before I started, they were looking at some numbers. They were doing some operational stuff. I won't tell you anything about the company other than it's a consumer goods that makes something that you and I both have in our homes. And so they have one of their 7 plants that makes this one particular product that's run by a woman. The other 6 are run by men. And I had seen the numbers, and her particular plant was highest in ROI, profitability, and employee satisfaction. Her numbers were better than everybody else. And so during the day, the COO was chatting with me, and he was talking to me about her. And he said, she's wonderful, Tammy, but she wastes all this time talking to the women. So my first question is never diversity, it's productivity. That should always be where we go first. Do you get the output from her that you need? And he said, oh, she's phenomenal. But you see, she wastes all this time talking to the women at her plant. Well, what he didn't realize, because he only wore one set of lenses, he didn't have both, he saw that as misusing her time, when in reality, she was using her time in a way that made great sense for the people in her plant. And it yielded some of the best numbers that they had across the whole place. But it makes perfect sense that if you don't understand these rule differences, we can misjudge the other gender culture. So organizationally speaking, I mean, this overrides organizational charts constantly. You know, women will say to me on my way out the door, they'll say, do you have a couple seconds? And they'll want to talk to me about their female boss. And it's almost always an exact quote. The problem is she tries to tell me what to do. To which I have to say, she's the boss. She's supposed to tell you what to do. And would that be a problem if it was coming from a man? And the reality is that power dead even rule, it's so pervasive. And the problem is we don't even know about this rule. And my reason for joining you today is because there's a basic phrase in life, and it makes so much sense to me. And that is, you cannot manage what you do not see, and you cannot manage what you do not understand. And so I want to help organizations around the globe see it, understand it, and manage it. So when it comes to that power dead even rule, by the way, that's one of the most divisive parts of the female culture that we find. For the most part, it's a very friendly, cohesive, get along, be nice kind of culture. But there happens to be this one piece, and so organizations do need to look out for that. And when I'm working in organizations and I hear women saying, you know what, we need to see more women at the top, Tammy. There's not enough representation at the top. We want to see more women at the top. You know, what I'll find sometimes is that they'll move a couple women up in the pipeline to the top. And then you can sort of hear women in the organization chattering, saying, well, we don't want to see not that woman at the top. And so one of my big tips that especially if I'm working with women's networks, is I say, women need to be honest. And if it is you that you want to see at one of those senior positions, say that that's what you want. I want to see me at that top level position, because what can be very problematic is to have other women get there and then try to pull them right back down.
Another aspect of it too is that when we see the women do advance, sometimes they end up copying the roles of what they see their male leaders do. Do you tend to find that there's a lot of backlash there too?
Absolutely. And, you know, when you're looking at a very male dominated leadership team or a male dominated industry, it makes sense that for women to be able to survive, let alone thrive, they're going to have to become pretty proficient using the other set of tools. Because, if I continue to bring collaboration skills and asking great questions of my team, and they're all male and they keep looking at me to tell them what we're going to do as a leader, they're basically at the end of the day going to think that I don't know what I'm doing and I don't know how to lead. So if women don't make some flexing and adapting, and by the way, men do this as well in all female groups. Trust me, this happens in the world of medicine and RNs because 6% are men. So you get to see everything in parallel opposites somewhere. But so what ends up happening is that women often become frequent users of male tools, and so they move up the organization. And here's one of the things that I think is this is one of the biggest barriers to organizations today. Women who get to senior level positions behaving like a man. And I often even ask some of those senior women, do you think that when you think about the bell curve of research, and I didn't talk about this in the beginning, but when I talk about research, there's a bell curve to everything I'll talk about. I'm talking about the middle of the bell curve, what most men are like and what most women are like. And so when I ask, very senior level women, do you think that you were born in the tails or the outliers of the bell curve? Or do you think you just subtly adapted through your career so that you could be seen as successful? And women often say, I don't even remember. But here's why I think it's one of the bigger problems organizations have. When the only women who get to senior positions are women who seem to have abandoned the female style and only use the male style, it sends a subtle message to the rest of the organization. There's no other way to get there. And to cause any segment of your population to have to turn off who they are every day so that they can be seen as successful. First of all, it's really hard to do physiologically. It wears you down to constantly think, okay, no, don't answer it the way I normally would answer it. Think about how that he would like to hear that, or think about how she would like to hear that. That's really physiologically exhausting. But I think the bigger problem is you're already at a productivity deficit when you have to use that energy to do that. So by making or forcing any segment of our population to constantly have to flex their style, they already can't bring us their best stuff. So when you think about who you look for to migrate to the top, do you see how problematic that is if women are spending so much energy trying to behave in ways that sound successful to a male culture, or men are spending so much energy trying to operate in ways that sound successful in a female culture? So really the goal here for bottom line, and this is not a feel-good topic, this is about helping organizations thrive in their bottom line. Engaged employees and engagement is inhibited by differences. So if we can help an organization embrace and understand differences, we can increase engagement. And there's a number that just came out last week in the New York Times. They estimate that globally, organizations lose $600 billion a year in low engagement. So we hire somebody to give us 8 hours of work, and they're only giving us 7 or 6 or 5. And they might even be, and the problem is what if their engagement is inhibited by the fact that they spend the other 2 or 3 trying to be somebody they're not?
It's exhausting.
Yeah, sure is.
So it sounds like what we really need to focus on here is not just simply getting women to the top, but empowering them with the tools and the strategies that they need to lead with their innate skills so that they can empower others to do the same.
Right. We want both men and women to be able to have the lenses to understand both gender cultures. And that is where people will get into their groove, the sweet spot groove of bringing their best work when they're not having to spend so much time operating in a way that makes sense to other people so that I look successful. Obviously, everybody's got to do a little flexing here and there. Right. But I often tell organizations, I had a conference call today, bringing me in to just work with women, I'm happy to do. But at the end of the day, only half of your population has the tools to be bilingual. And
Mm.
that at the end of the day can send a subtle message. I certainly am not sending it, but it's a subtle message that women need to flex or adjust or adapt. And yes, depending on what the dominant culture is, everybody has to flex and adjust and adapt. But we want to create a space for the work world where both can operate out of their strengths because it impacts our bottom lines.
So to flip the script here and think about it from the male's perspective, what is usually how are they experiencing their interactions with women too, when they're having to now put them in these positions of leadership, and there's the communication differences in the way that we connect and work and at meetings, especially. I know a lot of women speak about being talked over. How is the male experiencing it on his end?
For starters, I want to say that most of corporate America is actually most of corporate around the globe. Most is run by the rules of the male culture. So in general, for most men, the workplace is a pretty comfy spot. I think of it as the pool, the water that men have swam in their whole life. And so when people start talking about, well, we need to do some learning around here, we need some awareness about differences, it's not surprising to me that men say, well, why? I mean, because everything's pretty comfortable and it functions really smoothly. I don't understand what the big problem is. I get it. I had a man one time ask me, why are we spending so much time talking about the differences between the male and female culture? Aren't they so much more similar than different? And I said, I think research would validate that they probably are more similar than they are different. But the similarities don't cause the hiccups in the workplace. It's the differences that do. And that's why we have to kind of talk through those. I mean, I find men to be such fantastic champs of wanting to make sure we create bilingual workspaces. One of the things that I think is very important when you do create awareness opportunities like we do, where we provide learning experiences, I think it's really critical that it be balanced, that it's really about helping men understand the female culture and women understanding the male culture, not just one way. If you try to promote or change a culture at the expense of another one, why would they be a champ of that?
What are the trends that you're seeing when we're able to see that more women are pursuing graduate and PhD degrees in business, but we aren't seeing the numbers show up in leadership positions?
Yeah, and I think that's probably, yes, the numbers are certainly not correlational. I think it's a great sign of the fact that unconscious bias still lays pretty heavy. And if I am not looking for the unconscious bias that I have, I will never find it. And that's the key with this, is that we've got to be active and engaged, constantly questioning ourselves, and then questioning even in our meetings, teams, about so why do we think she's the best candidate, or why do we think he's the best candidate? Because even listening to people who talk about their track records of success and failure, it's radically different. The research, it's radically different between most men and women. Let me just take you through one big difference. You think about talking about your success and failure, and how many people are asked in interviews, either for promotions or even jobs, tell us about the things that you're really good at. Tell us the things that, you could improve on. Here's what the research is on this. So they've been doing this for years. It's called attribution theory. It is not gender research. It is anthropological and sociological. It falls by gender all the time. And by the way, attribution theory has been run in a myriad of ways in every country around the globe. But let me give you one of the ways that they run it. They get a big room of men and women together, and they tell them that you're going to give them a task to do, and you give them a few minutes to do the task. The task doesn't seem to matter at all, and then you divide the room in half, and you give bogus results. So you tell half of the room, hey, you guys did really well, and ask them why they did well. And then you tell the other half of the group, oh, you guys did particularly poorly, and ask them why they did poorly. When men are asked why they do particularly well, first of all, I want you to know that they have tested this around the globe for more than 50 years. This isn't something new. This has been going on for a long time. They've even tested this with children of all ages and adults, and the results have stayed the same. So when you think about epigenetics, DNA being handed, there's got to be a part of that that's in this too. They ask half the group that did well, they say, why did you do so well? Men tend to attribute it to factors inside themselves. You asked me to do it, didn't you? When women were asked why they did particularly well, they attribute it to 3 factors outside of themselves: effort, task ease, or I got lucky. So I, tried real hard, wasn't so hard to begin with, I got lucky. When men were asked why they didn't do well on the project, they attribute it to factors outside themselves. The 2 most common answers tended to be didn't have enough time, instructions weren't clear. When women were asked why they did poorly, they tended to point to factors inside themselves. I tried, I just couldn't do it. I want you to get these dynamics. When men succeed, more comfortable pointing in. When women succeed, more comfortable pointing out. When men fail, more comfortable pointing out. And when women fail, more comfortable pointing in. And this isn't suggesting that women are always self-deprecating and that men are arrogant. This is just showing that there is a big difference between men and women when thinking about how they attribute success and failure. And I got done one time working with a group of executives in Bonn, Germany. And a man that was in the back of the room, he lifted up his wrist and pointed at his watch, asking me if I had a few minutes. And I had a little bit of time before I needed to get to the train station to head to the next place for the next day. And he waited for all of his colleagues to leave the room. And he came up to me at the end of this session and he said, Tammy, I needed this before today. And I said, why? And he said, well, I run, it's a big telecommunications company. He said, I run sales for the organization. At the time, I didn't know who he was, but I found out later that he was extremely high level. And he said, I recently lost one of my sales directors. It was a man. And so I was looking to replace him. And a woman had come highly recommended to me from 2 colleagues in the organization. So I decided to bring her in to interview her for this role. And he said, during the interview, she spent a lot of time telling me about the great sales teams she had a chance to be part of in her tenure. And he said, I kept asking her to tell me how she had been successful, leading. And he said, I even got frustrated with her at one point. And I said, I don't really want to know about the teams and how great they were. I want to know about you. What have you done? And he said, Tammy, I didn't even see it at the time, but her face kind of got a little uncomfortable as I think back while she tried to walk me through how she had been successful leading teams. He said, Tammy, I'm embarrassed to tell you this, but I chose not to hire her. And I even wrote in my email to the 2 colleagues that had highly recommended her that I was going to pass on her because I didn't think she spoke all that well of her accomplishments. The man I chose to hire spoke really well of his accomplishments. He said, I never had this before. There was no malintent involved here. He had no idea that a man and a woman might speak differently about their success path. Isn't that kind of fun? I mean, you think about unconscious bias. Yes. I have to create some consciousness to some of it because most people just go, yeah, it's unconscious bias. Oh, it's pervasive in a myriad of ways. That's just some of the linguistic research.
And that's the thing about all of this is that it doesn't come, nobody is doing it with the wrong intention. It's just there. It's our bias that we have. But when we look at our careers and we think about it is the largest time span that we will spend in our life doing anything, 47 years in our careers. And we know right now that the playing field isn't leveled. We still have some work to do. I think we're making a lot of progress, but our work isn't done. And it's so important for all sides to arm ourselves with the awareness of what needs to be done and how it may look, because we're impacting the livelihood of so many people throughout that without even knowing. And even in our own organizational success, when we talk about really engage, what it looks like to really engage our people so that they can show up in their authentic selves and so that they can provide the level of service and product that we like to do for our clients.
Right. Yeah. And then the bottom line here too, it comes back to the bottom bottom profitability too, because the bottom line is, if I didn't know what I just told you, which that man didn't, and you're right, 99, probably it's 99 point something percent of the time, there's no malintent involved. And I help unpack things with organizations that are messy all the time. I very rarely find that somebody's really trying to come to work to make it difficult for you. They are just operating in ways that make perfect sense to them. And so if I can understand what makes perfect sense for you, and you can figure out what makes perfect sense for me, look at how we have just hurdled, and we can fly as a productive team now because nobody's having to do all that extra physiological work. So yeah, no, there's not malintent. And I think that's probably the best way for us to always approach our colleagues and our leaders, is that they're not intentionally trying to make this a problem for us. Let's see if we can figure it out. So be aware so we can see it, understand it, and then figure out how we manage it. But I do want to say that I think the ownership for making sure that we're aware, it starts with everybody, because there's really nobody I can change but me. But I just implore organizations, those leaders who might even be listening to this podcast, it's got to stop. It's got to start at this top. The only way to shift an organization, the only way to move a needle, is for the leaders to embrace these differences and to recognize unconscious bias. That then models it for the entire org.
That's very true. What, in your experience, have you seen has been the greatest initial impact when the top of the leadership does embrace this?
Yeah, and I've had the chance to work with a lot of organizations that bring me in to work with the C-suite or the senior team. I think the biggest piece is that they start, executives get a chance to start to challenge themselves. And that's really where you catch what you don't see about yourself. And so I think that's a huge piece. Let me tell you that there was a study that was done back in 2016, and it said that only 24% of employees, and this was looking at over 34,000 employees across 132 different companies, felt that leadership regularly challenged gender bias language. And so that's everything I just talked about, even talking about success and failure, some of those linguistic differences. If only 24%, a quarter of our population, think it matters to our leaders, that's the wrong number. I want to work for an organization that thinks that this is important. I think one of the bigger things is it's a structural obstacle. This isn't just I've got to learn. I want my leader to learn. Sometimes it's structures that are in place, because, if half of employees, because there was a study done back in 2012 that said half of employees think their CEO is committed to the issue of making their gender mix work well. That's not big enough. That's not enough. We got to figure out how, companies are great at hiring mixes today, diversity mixes, but mixes don't just organically work well together. You've got to help them mix.
And I love what you're saying there, because it's so important for us to challenge what we're doing and how we're doing it, and in the time frame that we want to take action on it, because of what we have to gain when we do. And so for those people who are listening and they're thinking, oh, I see myself in that, or I didn't even realize that I was doing these things, and they're asking themselves, what can I do to get more engaged with your organization? Where would you say it's best for them to begin?
Well, organizationally speaking, one of the things I always like to push on organizations to think about when you think about what should we be doing different as leaders, I think we've got to look at hiring, promoting, sponsoring, showcasing the work or diploma assignments, helping talent navigate. I think that's on us as leaders of organizations to help kind of navigate. For the people who are trying to figure out how to maneuver through the organization, who aren't in a leadership role, once again, I can control me. And even being able to have the ability to be bilingual will help you immensely, even if it's just reducing frustration. See, the three tools that I give groups, the first one is, after you've gone through and you have lenses to see the world and hear the world more accurately, one of the things that we can do is reinterpret intent. And reinterpret intent isn't a whole lot that we can do. It simply is where we flip the lever in our brain and we simply see the world the way that we think the other person might see it. That helps a whole lot because that helps take things out of the, malintent. You just don't want to see me succeed. You're not for me. That helps to take that out if I can assess, that maybe there's some gender driving this. And by the way, gender doesn't drive everything, but it's one of the models for us to look through to figure out how we can be more effective with people. For women that are listening or men who tend to be in the tails of the bell curve, consider looking for stretch roles, those things that look, like they're a little bit more challenging. I think a lot of women and some men would really benefit from not just mentorship, but sponsorship. And here's the difference. Mentors chat with you about, kind of what's going on, but sponsors, they take on the responsibility of helping to pull you through the organization. So looking for people who can help you understand the cultural tapestry and help pull you up is something that's particularly important. Something else just crossed my mind and I lost it. Well, let's keep going, and then if it comes back up, Oh, yeah. I got it. I know. I was going to actually take you through just a little piece of one of the other things that I talk about with every group, and that is, it's another linguistic difference, but it helps to really look at that area that I'm intrigued by right now, confidence and competence. What they do is they say to a group that's full of men, women, cultural diversity, everything in the room, they'll say as part of this study, hey, we got a new project that's coming down the line. What would you do if we gave you this project? How men tend to answer that question sounds like this. We'll do A. If A doesn't work, we'll do B. If B doesn't work, we'll do C, clearly. Go to the woman, ask her, new project coming down the line, what would you do if we gave it to you? A woman is more likely to answer it this way. To be perfectly honest, I'm just not sure. I suppose we could do A. I don't think we have time for A. I suppose we could try B, but I'm sure there's no budget money for that. I suppose we could try C, but to be perfectly honest, I'm just not sure. Now, does he know any more than she knows? No. What research tells us that men tend to do, and it's a very researchy sounding term, is make it up. I'll tell him I can do it and then see if I can figure out how to do it. And this is not slimy. This is not lying. This is risk taking. What women tend to do, according to the research, and it is they go into the confessional. Before I feel comfortable telling you any of my great ideas about this new project, I want to make sure you understand everything I don't know about this project. And only when I feel comfortable that you know everything I don't know will I feel comfortable telling you what I do know. Now, why would women do this differently than men? For men, this is pure risk taking. And for women, this is called honesty. You're looking at buying me. I want to make sure you know right up front what you'd be getting if you're buying me. But look at who we as organizations that don't know that this bias exists, look at who we're more likely to select. And I do want to tell you that categorically, they're completely opposite buckets. Risk-taking is not the absence of honesty. And honesty is not the absence of risk-taking. They're completely separate buckets. But that's where men and women tend to land with this sort of study. And if you think about it, you'll see that this happens in your organizations all around the globe every single day. And it's just a linguistic difference. By the way, they took another piece that supported this pretty dramatically was a study that they looked at MBA applications. They went around to major universities around the globe and they said, hey, if you ask applicants to write an essay describing their future on applications, may we please see the last 5 years of your applications? So they collected tons of these, went through and found that there was one big gender divide. Men tended to begin their essays describing their futures with the word I will. When women tended to begin their essays describing their futures with the words I hope to or I would like to. Now, all of you listening, you're on the MBA application committee team, and we only want the best and the brightest students. Who are we going to pick? The one who will accomplish their dreams or the one who hopes to accomplish their dreams? He made that up. She went in the confessional, risk-taking versus honesty. If I don't have lenses to see it, though, I'll completely miss it. And then the only other piece that I want to add to that is very public data, so many of you may have even seen this, is the research from HP. HP hired a consulting firm to come in and help them understand why the top half of their organization had numbers they did not like for their gender mix, while the bottom half had, great 50-50 mix. So their culture got studied for some time, and they came back to the CEO with these results. They said, we found in your organization that men are likely to throw their hat in the ring for a promotion if they feel they have 6 of the 10 qualifications necessary for the job. And we have found in your culture that women are likely to throw their hat in the ring for a promotion if they feel they have 10 of the 10 qualifications.
Oh, that's big.
Yep. So this, and that's what really, I speak at Grace Hopper. I've spoken at Grace Hopper the last 3 years, which is the biggest women in tech conference. I'm not going this October because I'm busy, but I do a big breakout session. And one of the ways I start my panel is I ask the sea of women who are in the tech space, and there's a few men that join us in the conference too. But I asked them, I said, today, the way that the world works today, you can only be one of these. Would you rather be seen as competent, or would you rather be seen as confident? And I asked them to raise their hand for each of those, and the sea of hands go up for competence. But turns out, UC San Francisco has found that when they study businesses, confidence appears to matter more for moving up through the organization than competence does. And so this becomes a big hurdle or a tightrope walk for women, because their natural tendency might be to want to make sure they've got everything right first before they'll put themselves out there. And also, women struggle with imposter syndrome. And there's lots of well-documented research, not feeling like I can speak on something unless I know everything about it. So these can just be challenges for sure.
And what can women do about imposter syndrome?
Well, I think one big thing is awareness. Be aware. I also think another big thing is your network. And I don't think your network should just be women. I think your network should be men who also understand these differences, and they can help point that out. Because when you think about applying for stretch jobs that require slightly more than what you think you've already got talent-wise, because of these differences, men are much more likely to throw their hat in the ring for stretch assignments because of risk-taking and, all the ways that we've talked about some of those differences. There was also a McKinsey study that was done, and it found, when they looked at organizations around the globe, that men tend to be hired and promoted on potential, and women tend to be hired and promoted based on experience and track record. So that right there is an unconscious bias that we don't even realize. We tend to rate men on forward progression, where we think they can go, and we tend to rate women on past performance, where they've been. And those aren't even similar or balanced approaches when you think about looking at two candidates.
This is all so interesting. And, it makes me think about another point here is, as both of us being mothers to boys, for those of us who are parents, what can we do to foster a positive change when it comes to gender differences in our children for the next generation?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. And by the way, the last chapter in the book is all about what do we do about the next gen. So I've got 2 boys. Oldest is almost 23, just graduated electrical engineering in May. So we've got one off of the payroll, which is great. Yeah. And then we've got one who is just turned 21 this week, and he's about to start his junior year studying to be an RN. And I'll tell you, one of the things that both my husband and I have felt very compelled to over the years is to try to make sure our boys are equipped with both sets of lenses. We want them to be able to see and understand and by the way, strangely enough, if my son decides to not go beyond RN, he is going to work in a very female-dominated world. And so I hope he's got both sets of tools, because he's going to need them to be able to be effective. Right. But I'll tell you an example of something that happened in our personal family life that I was so celebratory that this happened. Both of our boys were student athletes through college. They both were fun athletes all the way through life. That was just how they're bent. They love to do that. But the youngest one was a football player, and we happened to live up in the Seattle area at the time, and he was probably in his sophomore year. And he came home from football practice one day, and he said, "Mom, the weirdest thing happened today with the girls, and I need you to explain it to me."
Oh,
So I thought, okay, great. Come on out, pull up a chair by the counter while I'm cooking dinner. Throw it at me. What'd you find? And he said, well, the athletic director came out on the football field after football had just ended and women's lacrosse had just ended. And he said he had 2 boxes of new jerseys, and he set them down. He pulled the girls over and he pulled the guys all over. And he said, we got 2 boxes of brand new jerseys. Problem is we didn't have enough budget to buy new jerseys for everybody. So some of you are going to be able to get some new jerseys, and some of you are going to have to wear last year's jerseys. And he said, Mom, it was the craziest thing. He said, of course, all of us guys started jumping in the box, pulling out ours, making sure, I'm a starter, you're not a starter. I get one, you don't get one. And he said, they just navigated their way, and the box was, boom, empty. And he said he looked over, and the women were all standing in a circle around their box, and nobody had grabbed a jersey by the time the boys had already gotten all theirs. And he said, what is wrong with women? I said, well, there's nothing wrong with women, but remember how we talked about communal and relationship. And I said, what the young women were afraid of is that by taking a jersey, they were afraid that they were bumping themselves up in that power dead even rule we talked about earlier. And they were saying, I'm more important than you, so I get a new jersey, you don't. And I said, that was problematic in the female culture in a way that it wasn't problematic in the male culture. And so I'm thankful he brought those things home, because I want him to be able to figure out how both cultures tend to work differently. And by the way, speaking of power dead even rule, I've got to give you something that's very current.
yes.
Those of you who are listening, if any of you are U.S. soccer fans, you know that our women's team beat Thailand in an unprecedented victory, 13-0, probably about 5 weeks ago now. I was arriving out to speak at Dana Point, California, and opened my email to look at some news feeds and saw that they had thumped on Thailand 13-0. And not to mention, is that a big win? That's a win that no man's team at that caliber has ever even experienced. That's a huge, huge victory. And what was interesting is the next morning I read my news feed, and other female athletes were telling them that they did too much celebration. There was too much fist bumping, too much chest bumping, and that they made the women from Thailand feel badly. And what's interesting is over the next week, I started to pay close attention to the media over the win. And these were words. I pulled 4 words out that were used over and over and over again to describe our U.S. women after that win. The words were ruthless, arrogant, distasteful, and disgraceful.
Oh, no.
And I've worked with ESPN. I can't even imagine words like that being used in a male game. And that's why it's really important that we have the lenses to see that that's what's happening here, is the women were elevated, and so other women were trying to bring them back to where they belong.
Yep.
Because we can't manage the power dead even rule if we don't even know what's happening.
That is certainly one that we will be digging into more. We did get a question in from one of our listeners, and they wanted to know, is there currently any trends that could potentially change the rules of hardball for women in business that you're seeing?
Well, I think a thrust for learning about the differences is probably the only way we're going to get there. And I do think that organizations are spending some good energy trying to make sure that their workforce tapestry is well equipped. Probably one of the things that is hardest about this is that if you make this learning elective versus mandatory, and by the way, I don't like mandatory at all. People feel captive coming in. I don't like it at all. I prefer elective. But here's what the research tells us. We learn from the area of life where we feel the pain, or they call it the rub, where life is difficult for us. So women tend to identify with and feel the rub of life in the workspace, because the workplace is often run by the rules of the male culture. Men feel the rub or the pain of life at home, because the home is often run by the rules of the female culture. And so what becomes, and by the way, that's a very subtle psychological thing that I have. So in our sessions, I give business stories to paint research, and I give home stories to paint research, because I need to get the audience where they feel the rub or the pain of life. And where this becomes problematic is that I think oftentimes organizations provide bilingual skills to those that feel the pain, and it often is women. And so I think organizations have got to figure out, how do we transfer bilingual abilities to the whole culture so that we can move or shift the needle?
And, one final throw out there that I want to put in is congratulations to the U.S. soccer women's team. I am so proud to hear that. And, it just goes to show how much more work we still have to do, but also how much opportunity there is out there to move the needle with our organizations and within our most significant assets, our people.
Yeah. And can I add to that?
Sure,
as a woman, I rarely step into a gender because I try to remain genderless and just speak to men and women. But as a woman, I need to monitor myself to see if I feel that sense of jealousy and feel the need to talk down about another colleague or a women's soccer team. I think there's a whole lot of personal ownership here on just making sure that we monitor and gauge ourselves.
That's phenomenal advice. And it all starts there with noticing within ourselves, catching those moments when we are aware that we could potentially be doing that, and then having the tools to know how to make a difference within ourselves first. Tammy, how can organizations get you to come in and do this very important work within their organization?
Well, what they need to do is just to find us on the website. It's easy, heimgroup.com, H-E-I-M as in Mary. Some people get that wrong, Group.com. If you go to our website, you'll get a chance to kind of get a flavor. Today, you've gotten a good sampling, too, of some of how we present our content. One of the things that I think makes us unique is that we focus and strive for balance in our approach always, because in our heart of hearts, we believe that both men and women bring fantastic stuff. What we want to do is make that mix work really well together so that people can bring us their absolute best work. So find us on Heim Group. Would love to work with organizations. We've got a long career of dealing with the research. So we'd love to be able to help other organizations too.
You just heard it. I will be sure to put it in the show notes. This is a game changer for organizations. And I thank you so much, Tammy, for sharing your expertise with our leaders. It's clear to see why you're a leader worth following. To our listeners, the ball is in your court. I challenge you to take action. Continue the difficult conversation. Reach out to Tammy in the Heim Group to conduct training with your company.
Thank you.
If you found even the smallest nugget of wisdom in this episode, share it with a friend and your friend will thank you. Let's continue the conversation with like-minded leaders and join us on Facebook at Go Flip the Script. Until next time, I challenge you to incorporate what you learned today to evolve your leadership impact.